Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is show 590. It's Sunday, the 8th of February. And in today's episode, we have quite a lot to look at. Riding motorcycles for women has been legalized in Iran. A Somerset dealer has closed, blaming a road development that cut the store off. There was a jail sentence for a rider who posted TikTok video, which appeared to have been posted online live as he stole the bike. New Zealand, a rider has been clocked at 120 miles an hour past a police radar checkpoint. The policeman gave up the pursuit. MotoGP has introduced a new concussion protocol, and we'll look at that. That'll link back to the in-depth item at the end of the show. Zero sales have climbed in 2025. Stark has plans for a new ultra-fast charging battery system. A Swiss Indian concept electric bike is using flax fiber for body panels. Yawa returns. Not that Yawa, the Indian one, but the original Czech manufacturer. And they have brought out a rather bizarre looking 730 twin. We'll have a look at that as well. Before we turn to the in-depth item today, it's Super Bowl Sunday, you may know. And what we'll examine today is what motorcyclists and American football players have in common, and that is injuries from head impact. So stay tuned for that. It's a fascinating piece of history and research, which we'll look at in depth at the end of the show. So settle yourselves down, grab a brew, and stay with me for the next 45 minutes or so. Right, now, what do we start with today? Just get to the right bit of my script to remind me. Yes, this is it. Brighton and the Sussex Medical School, they are inviting motorcycle riders to take part in a new research study. Now, this is entitled Riding Towards Successful Aging, Investigating the Health Benefits of Motorcycling. And the aim, as you probably guessed, is to look at how motorcycling can make you mentally and physically more healthy. If you've ever said that riding clears your head, sharpens your focus, or just makes your life feel better, this study apparently wants to hear from you. Open to anyone aged 18 or over who rides a motorcycle, and it all starts with a 15-minute online questionnaire. And if you want to complete that, if you want to join the show, the link is here. If I can actually get it into the right box, there it goes. It's just coming up on screen for you. You'll find it if you go looking for it anyway. Now, as I read the introductory text in the study here, the recruitment text, it sounds pretty strong language that I think will disproportionately attract riders who already believe that motorcycling keeps them sharp, who maybe want to validate their lifestyle, who have a strong identity investment in motorcycling, and probably who haven't suffered a major cognitive decline and enjoy talking about their hobby anyway. In other words, it's likely to attract a self-selected, highly motivated, positively biased sample. Now, I'm 100% positive that has not escaped the researchers, and that does make me wonder what's hidden under the hood here. One thing I've come to realize reading about psychology experiments is very often the study that people appear to be responding to is actually asking a very different question, one that is hidden from view. And so, one plausible possibility is that the study could actually address whether riders believe that they have received the benefits from riding more than they actually have. That's a plausible possibility. Or the other might be something to do with investigating the cognitive profile of people that predates their riding. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of other possibilities. Anyway, moving on from that, New Zealand racer Avalon Lewis, she's set to return to the 2026 FIM Women's World Motorcycle Championship. She'll be riding an R7. She's looking for podiums and her first ever world level race win. And she'll team up with Carl Cox Motorsports, continuing a partnership that actually started on Kiwi circuits. Now, this series does highlight sort of opportunities that are growing for female racers. Now, I actually worked with Avalon on one of the Shiny Side Up series out in New Zealand. Very nice young girl, and I do wish her all the best for the coming season. All right, okay, moving on rapidly, we get to the weather forecast, and the bad news is that it is going to continue to rain. Now, there have been multiple warnings in the press about snow across the country, but what really went under the radar, I think, was the storms. They really didn't get forecast early, in my opinion. Anyway, here's a quick look at a road I'm very familiar with. This is what's left of the Slapton Sands road leading to Tor Cross. That's the village you can see in the far distance. There's a white building down there. I happen to know this area very well, and if you recall last week's post about the filling in potholes with sort of domestic asphalt repair mix, I think they're going to need more than a few bags of that to fix this hole in the road. It's not the first time this has been damaged by storms, but it is pretty damn serious this time. Now, for the next few days, the forecast is actually for yet more rain, and the bad news is that this will hit that's not the wrong picture. Want to be weather photo. Oh, there it is. All right. It's going to hit the southwest of the UK in particular, but also the northeast of Scotland. Southwest has been very wet indeed. They've got a lot of flooding, and the bad news is there's more to come. Towards the end of the week, it's likely to turn colder, and that could bring some snow showers to Scotland and possibly down the northeast coast. So today remains generally cloudy. It's actually brightened up a little bit here in London. There will be some bright spells here and there. Most regions will see patchy rain or showers, more widespread in the north and the west. And this first band of more organised rain will come into the southwest of England by the afternoon, and it will be mild temperatures, sort of 10 to maybe 12 degrees. Now, Monday stays another mainly cloudy, mild and unsettled day. Heavy rain across the southwest of England and South Wales and the West Midlands as well, and eastern parts will be drier, southeast of England and also northwest Scotland, where there'll be some bright breaks. Now, Tuesday looks to be another wet day in the southwest of England and across northeast Scotland. Wednesday looks like a thoroughly wet day across most of the country. Cloud and rain is likely in the south for Thursday, but it does look at this point to be turning north, cold in the north as the wind switches direction and will bring in polar air, and that will bring wintry showers to Scotland and possibly down the east coast. Right, okay, so on with some news. Now, as I mentioned, the Iranian government has signed a resolution which allows women to legally ride motorcycles after obtaining a license. This is a big step forward amidst ongoing restrictions on women's rights out there. The decree tasks the police command with issuing motorcycle license to women following mandatory training and an exam, supervised, they say, by female officers wherever possible. Now, practical training must take place at licensed schools under female instructors, though men may be assigned if necessary, provided religious rules are observed. Men, of course, are also required to complete training to gain a motorcycle license in Iran. Now, the previous law didn't explicitly ban women from riding, but a subsection of one of the articles in the rule had limited licensing to men only. So 2019, a court ruling ordered local authorities to issue licenses to qualified women after a woman's complaint. Now, religious authorities out there have obviously historically opposed women riding motorcycles, citing concerns over modesty and hijab compliance. And in fact, since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, women in Iran have faced bans on all sorts of activities, including riding bicycles, horses, and restrictions on sports such as swimming, gymnastics, and boxing. So I suppose this is a small step forward. Now, a long-standing Bridgewater dealer has had to close, sadly. What's happened? Well, after 107 years, in the business, Anderson and Wall, which began selling bicycles in 1918 before moving into motorcycles and MOT services, permanently shut at the end of last month. Owner Richard Humphrey, who ran the garage with his brother, cited sort of the usual problems, rising business costs and cost of living pressures as key factors, but he also highlighted the impact of some local roadworks. Now, this is the Celebration Mile project, and apparently what it did was it cut off access to the garage completely, and not surprisingly, footfall in the store dropped dramatically. And he went on to say it was just the final straw. The closures prompted an outpouring of memories from long-time customers, and Somerset Council says it recognises challenges facing local businesses and promised to review the Eastover roadworks over the next 4 months, which is hardly going to help this particular motorcycle shop, all in the aim of improving the area for pedestrians and cyclists. Sometimes you wonder about priorities. Anyway, moving on, a Burnley man has been jailed. He posted a TikTok video of himself stealing a motorbike. Now, the KTM was taken from a shed in Burnley in July last year. The owner apparently had actually noted that 2 men who collected an item from him that he was selling on Facebook Marketplace seemed unusually interested in the motorcycle, and he actually had fitted extra locks to the bike. But around 1:30 in the morning, the owner's stepson apparently saw a video on TikTok showing the burglars break into the shed. Now, it seems, reading excuse me, reading between the lines, this must have been streamed live, because the owner was alerted and he went out to try and find the bike, and he found the 2 men actually riding it. The Cosworth Fleming, 21, he was on the bike with a friend on the passenger seat, but he lost control. He crashed into a Seat car and then veered off the road and hit a lamppost. The motorcycle owner then confronted the pair, and Fleming's friend punched him before they both fled. Now, Fleming himself was later identified through DNA evidence, excuse me, and he was arrested hiding in a wardrobe on October the 31st. At Preston Crown Court, the judge said he had no sympathy for Fleming or his accomplice. As always, can I ask you to take a moment to like and subscribe to this show if you've not already done so? Every click helps other motorcyclists discover my content, or simply share the word the old-fashioned way by telling your riding buddies about Elevenses. They can watch on catch-up. Remember, my latest riding skills articles are always free, and you can get all the links delivered weekly to your email inbox by subscribing to my newsletter at survivalskills.substack.com. Or you can use this QR code to jump straight to it, when the show's over, of course. No spam, and if you don't like the content, unsubscribe at any time. Right, just a quick hello to Clive. Kevin's here, Nick's here too, and Kevin says Chloe Jones is the one to watch for me in the female superbike races. I don't know her. I must be honest, I'm out of touch with what's going on in those races. I haven't watched much recently. Now they've all gone on to pay to view on, what is it, Paramount Plus, isn't it? Anyway, over to New Zealand again. A police officer clocked a motorcycle rider at 193 kilometres per hour, that's around 120 miles per hour, on the Ida Valley Road on Sunday morning. The police officer reported that the rider was on a sports bike, and he said, at that speed, all I saw was a blip. He activated sirens and lights, but abandoned the pursuit when the rider overtook a convoy of motorcyclists that were assumed to have been leaving the Vincent Rally in on Macau, and when he realized that rider wasn't going to stop. Now, the incident actually followed a serious crash involving a female motorcyclist in her 60s near St. Bathans on Friday. She remains in hospital with serious injuries, and it was the weekend of the Burt Munro Challenge this weekend, which ran, I think, from Thursday to this lunchtime in New Zealand. It's obviously the best part of 12 hours ahead over there, so most people will have headed home by now. It's the largest motorcycle event in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's also the Waitangi Day long holiday, so authorities were warning riders in New Zealand to be careful on the roads. Now, MotoGP, their governing body, the FIM, has introduced their first concussion assessment and management guidelines, which they say makes a key step for rider safety across motorcycle competition. Now, head injuries remain a major concern in motorcycle racing. High-speed crashes carry a substantial risk of trauma. But in recent years, concussion management has been under scrutiny across global sport. Tangling my words again this morning. Evidence links repeated head injuries to long-term health consequences. Now, compared with other sports, MotoGP has been pretty late to formalise its protocols, often facing criticism when riders showing concussion symptoms have been cleared to continue racing. Allegedly, I will say that, because I couldn't find any specific instances when I went to look for this. Anyway, FIM's inaugural guidelines, they've been launched. They followed the 2024 FIM Medical Summit in Lyon, and they have set out some clear, specific procedures for identifying concussions, to manage injured riders and determine a safe return to competition guideline. The FIM president, Jorge Viegas, stressed that rider safety is vital for the sport's long-term development. And the FIM's medical director, Dr. David McManus, he highlighted the extensive research and expert collaboration behind the guidelines, which will include education programs for riders, teams, officials, and federations. Now, the guidelines represent a positive step, but the FIM has not yet made them mandatory. And of course, that leads to questions about the enforcement of the guidelines and indeed the consistency across different events. And we'll be coming back to head injuries at the end of the show in the in-depth item, so stay tuned for that. If you enjoy these shows, why not become a member of my Ko-fi pages? Just follow the QR code and sign up. As a member, you get free access to the latest articles and the Survival Skills ebook shop, with instant downloads of everything from free mini-ebooks to ebook versions of my paperbacks. Become a one-off supporter and you'll open up the archive of over 1,000 articles. If you buy me a monthly cuppa as a subscriber, there's even more content to enjoy. Right, okay, so on to the biking news then. Now, Zero Motorcycles closed 2025, they say, on a high, reporting strong global growth and expanding their dealer network. Now, they say that North American sales jumped 89% year over year, and Europe and other markets were up 17%. And they say full-size bike sales were actually up 28%. So interesting, those numbers, given how many people in the UK seem to think that electric motorcycle sales are falling flat. What helped them to this successful result? Well, the X line of bikes, this is the Zero XB, designed to make electric riding more accessible. They say it accounted for over 30% of the North American sales. So to support this demand, Zero increased the number of the dealerships they have in North America by 40%, and they now operate in more than 250 locations worldwide. Retail sales in North America apparently were up 491% over 2024 in December, that is. So that's, I don't know whether that's people buying each other Christmas presents. Anyway, they confirm, they say, a growing global footprint and an appeal to new riders. Now, another development is that Stark Future, who you may recall currently build the Varg off-road bike, but are promising a new on-road bike. They are actually promising a new energy-dense, fast-charging battery for electric bikes. Now, this is a fairly fuzzy photo, but it's the best I could find. But what they're basically developing is a new purpose-built cell aimed at improving the range, the charging speed, and the performance of electric motorcycles specifically. And they have teamed up with a Chinese company to develop this what's defined as a 2620 cylindrical battery format. It's the one on the left, and it says it's tailored specifically to motorcycle chassis constraints. Now, the early prototypes, it's the taller cell on the left of photo, have achieved around 330 watt hours per kilogram of energy density, and now designed to support ultra fast charging in around 10 minutes, and they're said to reduce weight and improve thermal management compared to the more common auto-derived cell. That's the standard 21700 automotive cell, widely used in EVs like Teslas, in the middle of the picture. And that typically delivers between 250 and 260 watt hours per kilogram. So you can see the new battery does give quite a boost. They also say that the original cells are not optimized for tight motorcycle packaging or rapid repeated charge discharge cycles, and adjacent to the two is an iPhone to give you some idea of the scale. Now, Stark say that the longer, narrower 26120 design allows for more efficient packaging. Presumably they need less connectors between them, which is presumably how they increase the energy density. But they also claim better heat dissipation. That's a little bit more of a puzzle, since generally it's surface area which helps cool batteries, and generally the rule is that as you increase the volume of anything, its surface area decreases. Think mouse and elephant, for example. As a proportion, I should say. They also claim easier integration into a bike chassis, but I'd say that's a 3D packing problem, and I doubt the batteries have a great deal to do with that. Anyway, how close these batteries are to production isn't stated. There's no word on the production status of the new road bike either. That's the machine these batteries are designed for. Having said all that, the sort of broader challenge for electric bikes remains pretty much the same: balancing practical range and ride performance whilst keeping weight and cost down, all against the background, of course, of a limited charging infrastructure. Now, batteries are a bottleneck, that's for sure. Heavier packs add mass and price, of course. Smaller batteries limit usable range, and they then put pressure on the charging solutions to sort of pick up the slack if you recharge the bike on the way. Now, this is not it's not the only innovation that's taking place in the motorcycle industry. Several companies are looking to push the boundaries. We talked recently about the battery that Verge appear to be on the brink of bringing out. And it does depend on battery development to bring electric motorcycles into sort of the viable use for everyday riders, really, rather than just short urban hops. So whether Stark can deliver on their fast charge and high density promises at scale remains to be seen, but they did deliver their Varg bike, and that has been pretty successful. But it does signal that we do need to keep an eye on battery development, because it does matter. Now, here's a picture of another electric motorcycle, but I'm talking about this one for a slightly different reason. This one is if I can get the picture up, there it is. Let me just give you a zoom in view. This is the Ather Redux. Now, it's built by the Indian EV manufacturer Ather Energy, and they've partnered with a Swiss firm, Bcomp, to reveal this so-called futuristic concept. I do emphasize it is a concept at the moment. It's kind of a motor scooter, as they say, but it combines some motorcycle inspired dynamics. So the wings are the obvious feature here, but the point I'm interested in here is its bodywork. They're made from something called Amplitex, and that's a flax fiber composite panel. The material replaces conventional plastics and fiber reinforced composites. It's said to cut weight, reduces the CO2 emissions presumably in the manufacture and also disposal process by up to 85%, but when compared with carbon fiber. And it also offers natural damping, they say, vibration damping. So the bike's being described as a living laboratory, and it's a design and engineering experiment designed to inform future demonstrate here, but I think it's quite an interesting looking machine. This one is also quite an interesting looking machine. It's a Yawa, but not from that Yawa company. Now, for a lot of riders today, I guess the name Yawa barely registers. If it does, it's usually, I suspect, as the Indian-built retro bikes that have quietly sort of re-established the brand, at least out in the Indian subcontinent over the last few years. And that's why this new 730 Twin has caused a bit of head scratching, because it turns out it's not one of those Yawas at all. Now, it confused me until I untangled what are now two separate Yawa entities. They share the name, they share a heritage, but they're actually two very different enterprises. So we need to look at a little bit of history. The original Yawa Moto was a real historic Czech motorcycle manufacturer founded in Prague by a František Janeček. The name itself comes from the JA and the WA, or from the word wanderer, and it reflects the company's early engine partnership, apparently. Now, post-war, Yawa became one of Eastern Europe's major motorcycle brands, of course, but after the fall of communism, the somewhat, let's say, technologically challenged bikes struggled. But the legal seat of the Yawa brand still resided in the Czech Republic under Yawa Moto. There's still that Czech operation, there's still a Czech factory, it's just not set up at the moment for mass market volume. So you may be wondering how it is that the Yawa brand came to be built in India. Well, this is what happened. Around 10 years ago, Mahindra and Mahindra, via its subsidiary Classic Legend, signed a licensing agreement with the Czech Yawa Moto to use the Yawa and also the Yezdi name. I didn't realize that was part of their portfolio for their modern motorcycles built primarily for the Indian market. They duly designed and engineered a range of machines, which includes a Yawa 300. I think that's a 4-stroke single, if I remember right, and a Yawa 42, which I think is a bigger CC single. Now, they're all developed as modern, affordable, high-volume motorcycles, but with a classic design twist. They share nothing, no platform, no engine, no engineering lineage with the Czech built machines. It's just the name. Now, enter the Moto 730 Twin here. This bike comes from the original Czech company, as I've just explained, not Classic Legends. Here are the key specs. It's a 74 horsepower 730cc liquid-cooled parallel twin. The machine's Euro 5 compliant. The tubular steel frame gets KYB fully adjustable USD forks up front, matching rear shock. Brembo brakes, Bosch ABS. The tank is said to hold around 16 litres of fuel. Quoted weight is not too heavy at 213 kilograms, assuming that includes fluids. Now, the bike gets now standard TFT display with navigation and connectivity and full LED lighting, of course. Now, it's likely sales will be targeted at the Czech market, at least initially. So it seems that this version of Yawa, the original Czech company, does want to be noticed again. But I have to say, whether it does manage that will depend on pricing, which there's no word yet, whether the build quality is up to scratch, and the execution of the bike as well, whether it real world works. But the biggest question I have to say is what I think is dog's dinner styling. Will it appeal to anyone? The front end looks like it came straight off a 1960s MZ. It looks like that's attached to the frame of a 90s Triumph. And the seat unit just looks like it came off a sort of a yard-built special. The whole mix, I think, is a ghastly muddle. Right. Okay. So time to move on once again, and we have arrived at our in-depth special item. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to ask what it is exactly that motorcyclists and American football players have in common, and the answer to that is head impacts. Now, MotoGP, World Superbikes, and British Superbikes are over for the year, but in case you haven't noticed, it is Super Bowl Sunday today. So that means there'll be two teams and 60 minutes of controlled violence, bringing the 2025 American football season to a close late tonight. And if you look closely at some of the players tonight, you'll likely see something rather odd. A few players will be wearing what appears to be a sort of padded skull cap over their helmet. Let me just zoom in on that again so you can have a bit of a closer look of it. This is what's known as a guardian cap, and when I describe what this is doing, I think it might make you rethink what a motorcycle helmet is actually supposed to do. Now, these are outwardly two very different activities. One obviously involves a human atop a motorcycle, potentially traveling at high speed and occasionally falling off. The other involves a bunch of people running and catching a ball, but frequently running into other players. And the connection is that both sports have suffered head injuries right from day one. Now, American footballers have actually worn helmets for even longer than motorcyclists. I was really quite surprised to discover that it was early football history. It started out with them wearing soft leather caps back in the late 19th century, but they did offer very little impact resistance, but it was where they started. Hardened leather versions appeared in the 1920s, and the critical transition came in 1939 when the John T. Riddle Company still built American football helmets. They developed and patented the first plastic shell with a rigid outer first plastic helmet. And that design did ultimately replace the leather helmets. Not right away, but certainly by the 1950s, they had become standard protective headgear in American football. Now, American motorcyclists, as of motorcyclists here, largely wore nothing on their heads, or flat caps were typical. And head injury was accepted as an occupational hazard, much like early football players. Now, in 1914, a Dr. Eric Gardner, he was a British physician, he commissioned some canvas and shellac helmets for riders in the Isle of Man TT, because he'd been treating riders with fatal head injuries. I don't think they were particularly effective, but by the sort of late 20s, early 30s, leather pudding basin helmets had become common in racing and increasingly in road riding. Now, it wasn't until 1953 when Professor C.F. Lombard at the University of Southern California published some research showing that helmets could actually prevent serious head injury that the first hard shell motorcycle helmet was designed. Now, the following year, so we are talking 1954, Bell helmets introduced their 500 range, and this was the first widely adopted helmet that had a rigid fiberglass outer shell and an energy absorbing liner, and this was a true turning point, the motorcycle equivalent really of the football plastic helmet. And since then, motorcycle helmets have continued to follow the same basic architecture, regardless of whether they're ECE, DOT, or Snell approved. The outer rigid shell acts to spread the loads and to resist penetration, whilst the soft inner liner, usually EPS foam, is there to absorb energy by crushing. Now, that design is robust, proven, and effective, but it is also based on an assumption that the outer shell should be hard and smooth and largely passive. It hits something, the liner does most of the work. Excuse me, hay fever again today. I forgot to take a tablet. Now, for decades, we haven't really questioned whether existing helmets actually protect us from impact injuries, but American football has started to take the problem seriously thanks to studies into degenerative brain disease in sports where participants routinely suffer head impacts. And this is where we bring in the MotoGP revised concussion protocol. Because what's become clear from these studies is it's not just the impact force that injures the brain via skull fractures and heavy impacts. To some extent, you can solve that with a tough helmet. You stop most of these really sort of the fatal injuries with a helmet of the sort we wear at the moment. But what happens inside the helmet matters, and it's the acceleration forces, particularly rotational forces, that are actually suffered by the brain as a result of an impact, which are doing serious damage. Now, the reason for this is simple. The skull is rigid, but the brain is soft, and it floats in a soup of cerebrospinal fluid. Now, when the head is struck, the skull stops fairly rapidly as it hits the inside of your helmet, or it changes direction fairly abruptly as your helmet hits the ground and twists. The brain inside lags. It keeps moving. It hits the inside of the skull. It itself twists at a different rate to the skull twisting, and this causes shearing forces, and this damages nerve tissue. It damages the blood circulation, the microvasculature system inside the brain. It damages the white matter tracts, and it damages deep brain structures like the midbrain and corpus callosum. So these rotational injuries, they cause what are sometimes called diffuse injuries. And there is strong evidence that repeated but survivable mildly traumatic brain injuries, subconcussive impacts, actually cause long-term brain damage. So it's not just sort of the knockout blows that matter. You get knocked out in a game of American football or ice hockey or boxing, of course. There's increasing evidence that degenerative brain damage comes from milder impacts. Soccer players are now known to suffer from degenerative brain injury simply from heading a football. So it's become increasingly clear that these impacts that we might not even really take notice of do produce measurable lasting change in brain structure and chemistry, and they are linked, unfortunately, to long-term neurodegeneration and dementia. Now, in the NFL, they've done quite a lot to change the way the players actually hit each other. Head-to-head impacts are banned. Spearing, where the player uses the head to impact an opponent, they've been banned, and concussions are now rarer. Now, they also introduced several years ago mandatory concussion protocols. A field official watches every single play, and if a player is suspected of having suffered a head impact, such as when they're tackled to the ground and they hit their heads, then they are taken out of the game for an evaluation. And if they fail the evaluation, they're pulled out of the game completely. They're benched, and they can't return to playing the sport until they actually pass an evaluation. And that brings me back to motorcycling. Now, the obvious fact is that the average rider may not fall off on a regular basis, but motorcycle racers are the sort of kind of high exposure group who suffer exactly these kinds of impacts. Think how often Marc Marquez, for example, fell off in the last few seasons. It's scientifically reasonable and ethically necessary to treat repeated race crashes and these sort of so-called minor concussions as a serious long-term brain health risk, even in the absence of specific racer data. Now, in the NFL, they have also been looking at ways to reduce these accidental impacts, and this is where the Guardian cap comes in the picture here. As you can see, it's an outer layer that fits over the standard regulation NFL helmet, and basically what it aims to do is modify the impact force. Now, it's been excuse me, allowed in practices since 2020, and it's actually now mandatory for some playing positions in practice. It was first legalized for games last season, 2024, and as the 2025 season has progressed, I've noticed a growing number of players wearing this Guardian cap full time. Now, does it work? Well, Stanford researchers went looking for hard evidence, and they found that in controlled impacts, the Guardian caps actually did very little in a straight-on hit. So you imagine a sort of head-to-head impact. But for angled impacts, where the helmet is hit a glancing blow, the sort of thing that causes the helmet wearer's head to rotate, that something interesting did happen. The cap shifted on the outside of the helmet, and that sliding reduced the rotational acceleration on inside the helmet by around 15 to 20%. Now, if that sounds vaguely familiar, it should, because motorcyclists do have a version of this idea. It's called Multi-Directional Impact Protection System, or MIPS. So let's have a look at MIPS in a cycle helmet. There it is. The reason I showed you a cycle helmet is because it's easier to see. What the MIPS system, and there are other brand names now, that all do is that they introduce a low friction layer inside the helmet. The skull cap fits tightly to the head, but it allows movement between that skull cap and the outer shell itself. So basically you get some controlled movement of the helmet around the head on an angled impact. So the idea is the same as that Guardian cap has been shown to produce, to reduce the rotational acceleration before it reaches the brain. The key difference is where this slip it actually takes place. The MIPS means it's inside the helmet. The Guardian cap manages it on the outside. Now, what did surprise me, given the amount of time top helmet manufacturers spend trying to persuade us that their products are safer than the helmets from the competition, was that the MIPS system wasn't a product of the helmet industry itself. Now, after a nudge in the right direction by Malk, my vague memory of work on helmets with an outer layer designed to abrade on impact revealed that Sweden was a hotspot for early research into head injury biomechanics. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, they were working on investigating the potential benefits for soft external layers, frangible shells, which abrade on impact, shear reducing outer coatings, and even laminated sacrificial layers. These were intended to break, abrade, or deform on impact to reduce rotational acceleration. So as I say, this was 40 plus years ago. Now, unfortunately, that line of research was actually abandoned because the ECE 2203 and 2204 test standards of the time required high abrasion resistance, high penetration resistance, and insisted on shell integrity. And these were all tests, of course, these sort of frangible, wearable outer shells. They failed by design. So the idea died by regulation, not by science. So the same research team, they reimagined the concept, and instead of making the outer shell sacrificial, what they did was they moved to this slip mechanism inside the shell where the standards of the time couldn't actually forbid it. And this is what emerged as the MIPS concept that you're seeing in this picture here. And early prototypes and testing, they were done using cycle helmets, probably because they're less expensive. And anyway, the result of that was that the first commercial adoption of this system was by bicycle helmet manufacturers. And that's arguably because the bike industry was more open to new safety tech, and also there were fewer regulatory barriers. So MIPS in motorcycle helmets, well, it only began appearing in motorcycle helmets after it was well established in other fields. I've mentioned cycling, but also it's used in skiing helmets too. And even today, it's far more common in those kind of helmets than it is in motorcycle lids, mainly because the motorcycle test standards historically didn't test for rotational acceleration. So there was no regulatory incentive to the helmet manufacturing industry to include such a system. So let's sum up. Sports bodies maybe have been slow to recognize generally that the science of brain injury moved on decades ago, recognizing the micro injuries caused by rotation. And that means the bodies behind helmet standards and motorcycle industry itself have lagged here as well. The fact that MotoGP really only just starting out with optional concussion protocols should tell you quite a lot, really. If you want to find out the in-depth information about MIPS, and as I say, there are other types of this rotational injury reduction technology. I've just put the link up on the screen, but the question still remains the same. How do we work to improve protection of a soft brain in a hard world? Well, tonight's Super Bowl might just be one of the biggest live experiments in head injury prevention on the planet. Okay, so thank you very much indeed for watching today's show. That brings me towards the end of it, the conclusion. Before I go, if you do enjoy these in-depth sections and you want to continue learning wherever you're watching from, you can do no worse than look at my new Moto Online website. I've just finished putting together a dedicated site for my online coaching, and it is here. Just put the link up for you, motoonline.co.uk. You can find out information about both my 8-week e-course, which you can take in steps, and also my 1 hour one-to-one online coaching sessions where you set the agenda. So I know e-learning isn't everybody's cup of tea, but if you are open-minded about how you learn and enjoy having your thinking challenged, I think you'd be surprised just how effective online coaching actually can be. Right, so that is pretty much it for today. Thank you all for looking in, whether you have been here live or whether you're going to watch on catch up. You've been watching me, Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This has been my live webcast Elevenses. And make a date to join me on the next show for another roundup of news, views, and information about biking. And if you're all out there on your bike today enjoying a ride, do make sure that you stay shiny side up. And I will see you next time.